Writers have been arguing since, Aristotle, whether plot is more important than character or vice versa. My belief is that plot and character are not separate things. And great, truly epic storytelling is when you can tie in the fate of everyone in the world to one specific character's journey.
Welcome to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies. Each episode, we speak to a brilliant screenwriter who's kindly dug out their initial screenplay for what became a beloved movie, discussing what changed, what didn't, and why, from first draft to the big screen. This week's guest is the amazing David Hayter. In 2009, David realized a decades-long dream, writing a movie adaptation of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' seminal graphic novel, Watchmen. Co-written by Alex Tse, Watchmen told the story of a dysfunctional band of retired superheroes in an alternate 1980s America. It was a gripping, morally complex deconstruction of society's obsession with superheroes that ushered in a whole new age of Cape Crusader cinema. With Watchmen back in the public consciousness thanks to last year's fantastic HBO TV series, we spoke to Hayter about the incredibly different film Watchmen almost was. This is the story of a Watchmen movie that was slated to be directed by Paul Greengrass, that was set in modern day with America and Iran on the brink of war, and that ends with the death of a character who's spared in the finished film. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camel Demek. David, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm surprisingly good, given the global state of the world. And the current setting of the nuclear clock. But I'm doing pretty well, and thank you for having me.
Take me back. What is your first memory of reading the Watchmen comic? What kickstarted this incredible attachment to this story that you have that made you battle so hard to get it made?
My first memory is a friend of mine, John Lear, in Toronto. I was 15 years old. He was a comic book. We were both comic book collectors, and he came to me and said, "You have to read this comic book." And he brought me the original first few issues of Watchmen, which I hadn't been following, and I started to read it, and we both got obsessed. And then we waited each month for the next issue to come out, and then people probably don't remember, but the last issue took months, was late. And so we were all freaking out, trying to figure out how it was going to end. And I was pretty obsessed with it. And then, so that was the first time I read it, 1985. And then in 1997, I produced and starred in a little film called Burn, which you can see on YouTube. So somebody gave me their copy of the graphic novel, the fully bound graphic novel, and I sat in my dressing room between takes, and I would read it. And I was producing my first movie. I mean, it was a $217,000 film, but I got to the scene where Rorschach is in prison, and the guy's threatening to kill him, and he throws the hot grease in his face, and he turns to the prison cafeteria, and he says, "None of you understand. I'm not locked up in here with you. You're locked up in here with me." And just chills ran down my spine. I was like, "Oh my God, that's the greatest movie line that I've never heard in a movie." And I have to make this film. And there was at the time in '97, there was no way I was ever going to get the chance to make the most difficult graphic novel adaptation of all time. I wasn't anybody, but I had delusions of grandeur. And then weirdly, 2 years later, I ended up writing the script for the first X-Men movie. And suddenly I had agents. I was a big writer, and my agent said, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "Well, if I'm the comic book movie guy, then I want to make I want to adapt the greatest comic book of all time." And that's how it started.
And you mentioned people describing it as difficult. I mean, Terry Gilliam, who at one point was attached to direct, he called it unfilmable. What do you think was so insurmountable to these people? Was it the structural complexity of the story, kind of zigzagging out these different time periods? Was it the moral complexity of the original? What made Watchmen on paper so tricky to bring to the big screen?
Well, there's a number of aspects that make it difficult. First of all, it's incredibly complex. Um, I often describe it as a 5-act structure, but it might be a 7-act structure. I mean, it's a number of interlocking character pieces that sort of check in with everybody along the way, and it's just not constructed like anything you've ever seen before. I mean, it's mostly constructed with the complexity of like a Dickens novel or something, and so I didn't find it particularly difficult to adapt. The story is so well written and so beautifully structured, even though it's unique. Adapting it wasn't difficult, but convincing a studio that they should risk 100 million plus on it was difficult. Also,
Mm.
because it's so intellectually profound, because it's so dark and violent, and there's a number of elements that would certainly in the pre-X-Men days preclude you from being able to get this made at all.
Mm.
And I think for Terry Gilliam, who is, just an enormous hero of mine, one of my favorite all-time directors, he knew how big it was, and I think he didn't feel that it could be condensed into a 2 hour and 40-minute or 3 hour format, which none of us were really sure that could be done. But we gave it a shot. I tried to, in my first draft, use everything that was amazing. I tried to edit it down without losing one single great line or great moment or anything that I felt made it Watchmen. So I think it just hadn't really been tried before to adapt it straight. And the thought was too overwhelming, but I was driven by my love of the material to give it a shot.
Mm. And as you mentioned, it is dark, it is complex. It's all of the things that in that particular era of superhero movies you can imagine studios kind of getting wrong. Over the kind of course of your fight to make the film happen, did you encounter much in the way of studio execs who just didn't get it and wanted to take it in directions that went against the spirit of Alan's graphic novel?
Yeah, Alan and Dave's graphic novel, but
yeah.
I always want to credit Dave Gibbons, who was the artist who created the visuals of it.
Of course.
That was my entire job, was kind of protecting the integrity of it from executives, well-meaning executives, but nervous executives who didn't think that it could work in its natural form, or who thought that there were too many characters. So, can you just cut it down into like Dan and Rorschach, or just make it about Dr. Manhattan, or take Dr. Manhattan out, or what, everybody wanted to try all these different things. And I just kind of held to my opinion that the story itself is what makes it Watchmen. It's not just the individual characters. It's not the individual pieces. It's like a clock.
Yeah.
It only works if you've got all of those pieces working in tandem. So, I had one of our executives at Paramount said, I don't understand the script. And I said, you do understand the script because I've seen your notes. You clearly understand the script. You just are afraid that the audience isn't going to understand it. And that was what we were dealing with for, pretty much constantly from the time I picked it up to the time that we got it made. Which
was 9 years, am I right in thinking?
Yeah. It was, I first signed I first got into it in 2000. The movie got made in 2009. But I signed my first contract with Universal on September 10th, 2001. So the day before 9/11, and signed the contract, and then something very similar to the ending of the book occurred in real life, and I thought from that moment we were dead. But we kept on and eventually got it made.
And were there moments across that 9-year struggle where you did start to think it's not going to happen for us?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, every movie I've ever worked on that got made has taken an average of 5 to 10 years, and every day there's something that's going to tank the whole thing, and most times it does. Most times the movie dies, and you move on to something else. So yeah, we were at four different studios: Universal, Paramount. I'm sorry, Universal, Revolution, Paramount, and then Warner Brothers, and nobody really wanted to make it. But nobody wanted anybody else to make it and make it a hit. So, they were all afraid to turn it down, but they were all afraid to pull the trigger. And it was really only when we were at Warner Brothers and they said, we've got this director who's just finishing a movie called 300 that we're very excited about, and which was Zack Snyder, of course. And when he heard that we were doing Watchmen, he said, I want to do that as my next film. And that's the only way that it got made, was a rising superstar director said, this is something we have to make. And it got greenlit. But without Zack, it would have never happened.
That is interesting, because you sent over not one, but two drafts of Watchmen out of, how many do you think you made? How many drafts do you think you did over the course of that 9-year period?
I don't know. I don't know, 30, 40, possibly 50 drafts.
Wow.
You're just constantly working on it. So the drafts kind of blend together.
Yeah. But one of them, so the first you sent over was your first draft for Universal, which you were slated to direct. But the second is from when Paul Greengrass of the Bourne movies was attached to direct, which is, as a kind of exercise in imagining a parallel dimension movie, is really interesting, because Paul is a director that I really associate with this kind of more gritty, realistic filmmaking, and Watchmen is so, from the comic to Zack's version, so stylistic. How do you think it would have, how do you think that film would have panned out?
We actually got pretty far with the Paul Greengrass version. We were, I think, 3 months from shooting when the president of the studio got fired and our movie got killed. So there's probably 40 or 50 minutes of Paul's version that have been previs. And there's so many cool things. Obviously, so Paul's style is like hardcore action documentary, very realistic and very gritty. Whereas Zack's style, as you say, is beautiful and stylized. So yeah, the two versions were very different. You can see, I loved Paul's idea that he said, when we open on Eddie Blake, I want to see him. He's like Superman, he's flying and his hair is going and he's handsome and everything. And then you pull back and you realize, boom, he's plummeting off this building. So, you sort of subvert everybody's expectations from the first image. And he found a picture of a homeless guy. It was like a book of artistic photographs of the homeless, and there was this one guy whose face was so caked in dirt that it was like a mask. You couldn't see his face anymore. You see his eyes sort of peering out of this caked black dirt, and his hair is all matted and everything. And he said, that's how I want Rorschach to look in without his mask. So that Rorschach really never took off his mask. There was so many cool things like that. And what else? He said that the steps that were leading up to the end of the world, he and I went through it, and he's like, okay, so first is this, attack on a sort of a Potemkin attack on a American warship, then this, the steps that boom, 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 the drumbeat that's leading us to war. And, and that was kind of a cool documentarian's view of how you set up that world. So yeah, it would have been very, very different. And, but it would have been very cool as well. I would have loved to have seen Paul's version.
Well, let's dive in a little bit to the script that you were developing with Paul. So one of the kind of like from the off, there's a big difference right in the very first line. Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 2006. So this is set in modern day. Can you tell me a little bit about how you tried to pull Watchmen into present day, and some of the avenues you explored, and why you ultimately decided that, hold on, maybe this is an 80s specific story?
Well, first of all, I originally wrote it to be set in 1985. I figured just adapt the book directly. I think it was Paul who felt that, and I don't disagree with this. The world is so strange of Watchmen. It's our world, but it has been altered in many ways. The timeline has been changed, and I think Paul felt, and I don't think this is wrong, is that adding a period aspect to it, putting it in the 80s, would make it difficult to know what was 80s and what was Watchmen.
Yeah.
The problem was that we still needed the Vietnam War. I felt, the Vietnam War and Dr. Manhattan winning that war for America is the pivotal change in the book's history.
Yeah.
And it changes everything. And I always thought that was key to the story. If we had won Vietnam, what would America have become? And so I believe it was Paul's decision to say, let's set it modern day. We'll keep Vietnam and sort of update everything. So instead of Nixon getting 6 terms in office, it was Reagan, and he's just being wheeled around in a jar or something. So that's how that happened, and then it was Zach's decision to put it back in the 80s, which I think worked just as well. The thing I liked about it being in the 80s was that in the mid 80s, kids forget this, but when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, they were telling us you could have half an hour's notice and then we're all dead. That nuclear bombs could be flying at any moment, and you'll get 20, 30 minutes notice, and then the world ends. And that was enormously stressful.
Yeah.
And that really fed into the writing of this book, why it was so important for Alan to make these points and for us to hear them. So I think going back to the 80s as well has a certain value as well.
The standoff in the graphic novel, of course, is between the US and Russia, but in this modern day version, it's between America and Iran. So we have a newscaster early on who describes an incident at an Iranian nuclear plant that America is denying having any part in. So yeah, was that just kind of part of the process of updating it, looking around and thinking, who are the countries with the most political tensions at the moment? Yeah,
well, I think the Iranian component was directly suggested by Paul Greengrass. Just looking again, with his sort of documentarian eye, just looking at the current, status of the world and where the flashpoints might be and what might spark a nuclear war. Also, in 2006, Russia and the U.S. weren't particularly contentious with each other. Russia was still recovering from the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think the feeling was like with the murder of Archduke Ferdinand sparking World War I, that Paul wanted, minor incidents to start setting off a chain of events that was going to lead to the end of the world.
And as you mentioned, the script starts with this incredible image that sort of overturns your expectations. So we start with a man in his 60s, handsome despite the jagged scar which runs from mouth to ear like a gaping smirk. It reveals that Eddie Blake is falling 30 stories from his penthouse apartment. So obviously all the way through seemingly all these drafts you did, there was a willingness on your part to stay true to the novel. And this sort of falls exactly into that. Were you always going to start with this scene at this point, just as it does in the book? Yeah.
The death of Eddie Blake is the spark that lights the whole powder keg, and so yeah, I don't think there's a single draft. I mean, there's a little moment in my very first draft of Rorschach, walking along the streets and sort of lamenting the fact that the heroes are gone and he's in hiding and so on and so forth. But he immediately he sees the body of Edward Blake hit the pavement and then investigates. That's what's so great about the story. It starts off with the murder of some older guy, and nobody thinks it's that big a deal, and yet it's tied into the fate of the world and the entire unraveling of these people's lives. So yeah, it was always going to look. The point was, I as a screenwriter warned myself never get to thinking that you're smarter than Alan Moore writing his masterpiece. Always default to whatever was going on in Alan's remarkable brain. So yeah, so anytime I had major questions about it, I just relied on the book, tried to find answers in the book, try to figure out how to move those pieces around so that a movie going audience would understand it, but never to try to out clever it. That always drives me nuts when you take an amazing piece of material and then change it to make it your own. It's like, that's such an arrogant, unless you can make it better, but that's such an arrogant way to approach great material, I think.
And that approach and that attitude seemed to win you some favor with Alan, right? I think he called you, or you called him.
Yeah, we spoke a few times. Somebody, I think it was a reporter, gave me his home number, and I just called him up and I said, look, I'm adapting your masterpiece over at Universal, and I know that you have great antipathy towards Hollywood, and I don't blame you in the least. But I just want to let you know how much this book means to me and how important it is that it stay true to your vision. And if you want to be involved at all, let me know. And he said, oh no, David, the book is my story and the movie is your story. But you give me a call anytime you want to discuss it. So every now and again I would call him up. And one time I said, Alan, are you busy? And he's like, oh no, I'm just baking muffins. And which I never forgot that. So I made it clear to him, and Alan does dislike Hollywood, and not to speak for him, but I think he's made this clear. The idea of spending $150 million on a movie is kind of appalling to him, and I get that. But he was so kind to me as a fellow writer and as a fan, and so yeah, he was always very supportive of me personally, if not, thrilled about the movie process.
And one thing that isn't here yet in the script is the incredible introduction scene set to a Bob Dylan song. So in the final film, you have this sequence that just packs in so much exposition about the rise and fall of these masked heroes in this alternate reality. I was wondering how that scene came about and how late in the day it was.
That sequence was entirely conceived of and executed by Zack Snyder.
Really?
And I don't know how it was done. I mean, I wasn't around when they made that sequence. I just sat at the premiere with my jaw on the floor. It's one of the greatest opening sequences of any film ever. And I talked to Alex Tse, who was on set when they did it, and he said that the studio, Warner's, kept saying, why are we paying for this crazy complex opening sequence? Like, this is crazy. And apparently Zach said to Alex, take it out of the script. I know what I want to shoot. So we'll just go do it anyway. Like you just toss off the most incredibly complex opening title sequence in history. He recreated the Kennedy assassination among 100 other things, and it wasn't even in the script. Like, I don't know how he did it. That's a miracle to me. I've never even asked Zach. I can't wrap my head around it, frankly. So I'm as stunned as anybody. I'm more stunned than anybody because I've never even heard of not putting something that complex in the script.
Let's talk a little bit about the characters, how you saw them, and what traits in them from the Watchmen comic you really wanted to protect. So we've already met Rorschach. Who was he? Who was that character in your eyes, and how did you go about translating him, this disturbing anti-hero?
Rorschach is somebody who he's a small guy. He's been abused his whole life, had this horrible childhood, and was bullied. And then he got to a point where he just snapped and wouldn't take it anymore. And his internal viciousness drove him to fight back against these bullies and later on against criminals or what have you. Anything he viewed as injustice would be taken on in a brutal and unforgiving fashion. And he really represents our darkest desires in a comic book character. One of the reasons that Batman is arguably the most popular comic book character is because there was a great line in a Batman comic when I was a kid where he said, "I don't care about the law. I care about justice." And there's something so satisfying, so compelling about somebody who will do the right thing and kick ass in the process of doing it. But what Rorschach does is he takes it so far that the audience is forced to go, do we really want somebody this unhinged making decisions as to what is right and what is wrong?
Yeah.
And he's kind of the ultimate sort of right-wing fascist illustration of how comic book heroes could work. But at the same time, like Wolverine, he's so unhinged. He's just a delight to watch. You know, there's something so freeing in what Rorschach is about that you know, it's a very satisfying character. It's you know, arguably my favorite character in the whole piece.
As you say, he does represent these dark impulses, and it's been interesting. I definitely have always categorized him as an anti-hero, but it's been interesting since the Watchmen film watching people misinterpret him as a hero. So I mean, as this kind of badass character to aspire to. Ted Cruz called him his favorite superhero.
Oh God, that's upsetting.
Yeah.
I don't like having anything in common with Ted Cruz.
Exactly. Has that been strange to watch, and what do you think it says about our society that so much of the nuance around the character was missed?
To a certain extent, Rorschach is the hero. You know, it may be imprudent to grab a man's hand and crush a glass in it and you know, squeeze it to get information. But at the same time, Rorschach is trying to do the right thing. He's trying to solve a number of murders, and he's trying to stop the deaths of, you know, a billion or, you know, millions of people. So in a way, Rorschach is the purest hero. You know, even when they get met with this moral compromise at the end, and I don't know how spoily you want to get here, but, you know, basically the person trying to save the world is like, if we sacrifice millions of lives, we'll save billions. And he's right. But Rorschach's the only one who's unwilling to go along with that plan. He's like, no, if you murder millions of people, you need to be punished. So I disagree that Rorschach cannot be viewed as a hero. I think he's definitely a flawed hero and definitely an anti-hero in that, you know, he goes way too far. But at the same time, you know, he takes a cleaver to the head of this guy who murders this little girl. And you know, would I do that? I don't know, but I don't necessarily object. You know, he just plays out our darkest impulses. But at the same time, his morality is literally black and white. And if you're bad, you're going down. And so I think there is a heroic aspect to him that's not just, you know, as opposed to the comedian who is completely amoral, who kind of goes where the action is and where the political power is and has no sense of right and wrong at all. That's an anti-hero. I don't even know if he's got any heroic aspects to him at all, except that he finds out about the grand plan and he gets upset about it, you know, so that shows a little bit of conscience. But I think Rorschach's far more heroic than say the comedian.
We then meet a character who fits into who's similarly hard to morally categorize. So we meet Adrian, who has a slightly different character arc in this version. So as we meet him as he's advising the military, he's telling them, we're close, gentlemen, very close to unlocking the secrets of the 21st century. In a matter of months, we'll be able to provide the world with cheap, clean, and infinitely renewable energy. So he shows particles that glow blue like Dr. Manhattan. He's been replicating his energy signature. Can you tell me a little bit about your approach to Adrian, what it was you loved about him, or sort of found compelling at the very least about him in the graphic novel that you wanted to kind of keep intact as you brought him to screen?
Yeah, Adrian is interesting in that he is all ego. You know, Adrian at one point, he calls himself the smartest man in the world, but we never have any empirical evidence that that's true. And he actually says in his sort of self-reflective moments in the book, I think I made myself, I think I chose to be smart.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, is he really smart, or is this just his ego saying, look, I'm the best in the world, so only I can solve these problems? And when you do that, it's a parallel problem to what Dr. Manhattan has, which is once your ego becomes so all-encompassing, it gets very difficult to know if you're doing the right thing or if you're doing the thing that aggrandizes you. And so, Adrian has this sort of Elon Musk type character to it. Elon Musk wasn't a person when we started this. I mean, he was, but we didn't know he was.
Sure.
But a guy who is smart enough to say, no, let's break the former paradigms. Let's say we need clean energy for the world. We can't keep destroying the environment, and we can't keep risking nuclear war. So he sets his mind to solving all of those things. And to Adrian, good is morally relative. So again, if millions of people die, but billions of people get a better world out of it, that equation is acceptable to him. Lives are just numbers at that point. So all of these characters kind of revolve around a view of your own ego versus the good of the world, and they're all sort of uniquely flawed in those ways, and it's really an amazing.
And as we go forward, the sort of thrust of the story is the same, but there are a few things that sort of condensed and collapsed in on each other. So there's instead of the Minutemen, which we have in the graphic novel, they're just sort of part of the Watchmen. They're the early kind of Watchmen superheroes. And I was wondering, sort of, was that just a case of trying to streamline things and bring it in under that 3-hour mark, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it cut any time from the script, but I think the feeling was that it's difficult to explain to a movie-going audience that yes, there were. Well, the real fact is there were the Minutemen. Then there was like the new Minutemen, and nobody was ever called the Watchmen. And I didn't want anybody to be called Watchmen because they're not. The title is a metaphor.
There's just one bit of graffiti on the back of the wall or something in the graphic novel.
Yeah, well, that graffiti keeps reappearing, but it's who watches the Watchmen. But that can apply to the police. That can apply to anybody in authority. It's who watches the people in power. So, but I think it was easier, in the final version, I think it was easier probably for Zach to just say they were the Watchmen, and that's it. It's just some things are, like the giant squid at the end of the book. I love the giant squid at the end of the book, but it was so complex to have to explain this extra alien squid event that it would have taken another half an hour screen time. So we did. There were certain things that we did simplify for the sake of the movie going on.
It seems like the things that you did condense or simplify, you maybe asked yourself the question, is this change still in the spirit of the original book? And if so, you went ahead with it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing, and this was the riskiest part of it. Nothing could stay in the film that I didn't think that Alan might have thought of in that vein, or it didn't, or like, as you say, that didn't fit into exactly to the world and the tone of the book.
So we then get to the prison scenes, which from the sounds of it was like that these are the scenes that sold you on Watchmen in the first place.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's such an amazing turn in the book. There's so much build up to it. So there's Dan, who we haven't discussed, but he's the woefully human man among all of this. He's a good man, doesn't have any particular powers. He's completely impotent in both metaphorically and literally. And then he, gets his groove back, so to speak. And the moment he does, he makes this decision and tells Laurie, I think we should break Rorschach out of prison. And it just comes out of nowhere. Like there's nothing in the story that would indicate that he would ever do this. And the audience is dying because Rorschach is in prison and nobody's coming to save him. You know, everybody's just going to let him die. And then when Dan says it, you're like, no, that's so awesome. It's so awesome. And it's just stupid and reckless, but it's his friend and it's the right thing to do. And there's such a joy in Dan and Laurie just cutting loose, saying, I don't care what the world says. I don't care that the world might come to an end. This is the right thing to do, and we're going to go kick ass to get it done. And so, yeah, it was just a joy writing it, reading it. You know, that whole sequence is an illustration of a man and a woman sort of coming back to life, coming back to what it is that they are meant to do. And so, yeah, it's very fulfilling. And I also love that Rorschach's not particularly surprised to see them. You know?
Yeah,
he's like, I knew you'd do the right thing in the end, and you know, I'm just going to go to the bathroom and I'll be out.
That's a fun detail, as is in this version of the script, Dan accidentally burning his house down while trying to show off Archie to Laurie.
Oh, well, that's in the book. She sets it off. She's the one she's looking for a cigarette lighter and she hits the flamethrower. And so yeah, we didn't want to lose that.
So we eventually get to that scene of Laurie on Mars trying to convince Dr. Manhattan to save humanity. What is it about that moment in the comic book that you wanted to sort of translate purely to the screen? Because it plays out pretty much exactly as it does on the page. What do you love about that moment that you wanted to kind of replicate authentically?
Writers have been arguing since, you know, Aristotle about whether plot is more important than character or vice versa. My belief, fed by a writer named Laos Egri, who wrote The Art of Dramatic Writing, is that plot and character are not separate things. They are completely entwined. And great storytelling is when you can, truly epic storytelling is when you can tie in the fate of everyone in the world to one specific character's journey. And that's very difficult to do. And the most successful versions of that are Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Luke in Star Wars. These two characters are arguably the smallest characters in their universe, and yet the fate of the world, the fate of everybody, hinges on their actions. What Alan did was set up a scenario where if Dr. Manhattan doesn't come back to Earth, the Earth dies. And he doesn't care. You know, he can't see any value in human life. And yet in plumbing through the depths of Laurie's memory, finds this incident that's so human and so flawed and so tragic that it makes him understand that Laurie, as a singular entity, as this woman that he loves, is a miracle. And that if she's a miracle, that all human life is a miracle. And if all human life is a miracle, he should go back and save the world. And it's so mind-bogglingly brilliant. And from a writer's standpoint, it's like this weird incident that happened before this character was born saves everybody on the planet. That's just storytelling beyond. That's why the book is on the Time 100 Greatest Novels of the 20th Century list.
So by this point, we're deep in the third act, and as in the final version of the film, Dan and Rorschach track Adrian to his ice fortress. Adrian, it's revealed, orchestrated the Iranian nuclear plant attack that we heard about at the beginning of the film. And then things get interesting in ways that veer off slightly from what we saw in the final film. So Adrian broadcasts a fake version of Dr. Manhattan to the world and appearing in the sky above all these cities simultaneously. And he says, "I am Dr. Manhattan. For years I've watched you barrel ignorantly down the path towards destruction. From this moment on, you shall change your ways of violence or be destroyed." And then the skies around the world flood with rippling blue energy and all hell breaks loose. People are incinerated as this kind of like warning blast. What was the inspiration behind that?
So everything is orchestrated by Adrian. Every step, all the steps to Armageddon that Paul Greengrass was asking for were, the murder of the comedian, the setup at the Iranian plant. All of that is orchestrated by Adrian, and we knew that it was going to be very difficult to do the ending of the book. And plus, since 9/11 had happened, I didn't feel that we should have those images of all the dead bodies in Times Square, and I felt that was not appropriate. So that inspired me to say people should just be, blown to shadows like they are, like the Hiroshima shadows that are painted on the walls in the comic book. And at one point I had him using like a sun laser beam, which was a terrible idea, and just trying to figure out how to make this ending work. And at one point, Darren Aronofsky was attached to direct for a weekend, and I flew literally for a weekend. I flew to New York for the weekend, and we chatted about it. And then when I came back, Paramount said, Darren can't do it. He's we've got to get the fountain finished and so on and so forth. So he stepped aside, but he sent me a note saying, I have a friend who's a physicist who had an idea for the ending of the movie. And it was, what if Dr. Manhattan was the agent of destruction? And that just clicked into place in my brain. And I was like, of course, that's what it should be. There's only one element of supernatural magic in this story, and it's Dr. Manhattan. So, and Adrian has been taking his energy to create, clean energy around the world. So why couldn't he replicate it to make it look like Dr. Manhattan was destroying all these cities? So that just was a revelation to me, and felt like an answer that fit the world pretty well. And that's how that came together. Did that answer your question? I can't remember how we started.
Yeah, perfectly. What was it about the squid that felt just like it wasn't quite going to work within this story? Yeah.
And again, let me just say, I love the squid in the story. I think it's amazing. It's a great, wonderful image. And but like I say, I have a philosophy that you want to keep your magic as simple as possible. So again, in Lord of the Rings, the ring is the source of all magic. It's the source of the elves' magic. It's the source of the other rings' magic. There's only one source of magic. You get rid of it, the world changes. The Force is the only source of magic in Star Wars. So here we have, like I say, we have one source of magic, and it's Dr. Manhattan. That is one fantasy leap that we take and say, this is a man who can do anything. The squid was an additional supernatural sort of element that was different from Dr. Manhattan and would have required a lot of explanation. So in the book, there's a whole thing about he had these writers and artists and geneticists working on this thing, and they made it, and then they had to kill those guys, and then they teleported the squid in, but it wasn't just a squid, it was a telepathic beam that like caused all these people to have nightmares and bloody noses and whatnot. It was just a lot to explain. Like it would have taken another half an hour of screen time to just explain why a giant squid, how did it get there, what was the impact, why did it have psychic powers. It was just too much in a movie that was already packed with what I would argue is the more important stuff, which is the character journeys. And it didn't really apply to them at all. Tying it back to Dr. Manhattan sort of gave Dr. Manhattan a cool ending and made Adrian, in a way, the manipulator of Dr. Manhattan. If Dr. Manhattan didn't exist, Adrian would be the most powerful man in the world. But he does. So Adrian's ego drives him to come up with a plan that says, no, I've used you. I am the most powerful man in the world, and I used you as a pawn. So I think that appeals to Adrian's ego as well. So it just seemed to make, it was a lot cleaner storytelling wise, and it made a lot of sense from the character perspective.
So yeah, as you say, it was so much cleaner, and it did serve the story. But as a purist and as someone who loves the graphic novel, was there a bit of a like deep breath moment of truth? I hope people are going to accept this change and they're going to understand the reasons why I'm making this change to their beloved novel.
Well, from the perspective of being a fan myself and a fanatic myself, there was certainly a reticence to change anything. But, people ask me all the time about the pressures, the fan pressure to satisfy the fans of Watchmen or X-Men or what have you. And honestly, I don't feel any of that. I feel like I'm as much of a fan as anybody else. I try to get to the root of what is appealing about the X-Men world or the Watchmen world, and I try to tell that world as truthfully and as close to the way it was presented to me as a fan as possible. And I figure if I'm satisfied with it, most fans will be satisfied with it. But you are never going to please everybody, and trying to do so will only drive you crazy. So I don't. It sounds callous, and it is callous, but I feel like if I do my job properly, enough fans will go, yeah, that was awesome. That felt like the experience of reading the books. And that's good enough for me. Worrying about the 12% of people who are going to never speak to me again because of the squid is not something that's foremost in my brain.
Right at the end, there's this fight between Adrian and Dan. Rorschach has been shot. Adrian beats Dan and looms over him. He asks him, before he's presumably about to kill him, why an owl? What's frightening about an owl? And then Dan opens his hand and reveals that he's been holding this remote. He says, because you never hear an owl coming. And then behind Adrian, floodlights blaze, the owl ship dives through the clouds and crashes, plowing into Adrian. Adrian dies. Can you tell me a little bit about that ending and sort of why you, for a moment there, were exploring if it would be more satisfying to see Adrian die having committed this atrocity?
Look, I love that ending. I really, if there's one thing I really regret about being lost from my drafts, it was that ending. Because I feel like Dan is a passenger in the story, and he kind of gets buffeted around by the winds of everybody, the more powerful people. And he kind of just, in the movie, he beats up Adrian. Adrian allows him to punch him a bunch of times, but it's not particularly satisfying. What I wanted was Rorschach can't live with it and says, no, never compromise, even in the face of Armageddon. Justice is justice, and people have to be told. And to save the world, Dr. Manhattan blows him up, in front of Dan's eyes. And it's just so horrifying and so tragic to Dan. But they make it clear to Dan, if it was revealed that Adrian was behind this, the world goes back to nuclear Armageddon. You have to keep the secret. So what I wanted was, in the middle of the night, for Dan to be sleeping in Karnak. He's cuddled up with Laurie, and he wakes up, and he just can't live with it. And what he's realized from what he's learned from his friend Rorschach is justice is justice, and evil must be punished. And the second thing that he realizes is the world can't be allowed to find out about Adrian's plan, but that doesn't mean Adrian needs to be alive to enjoy the fruits of his labors. He can go. So, and the thing that I really love about that ending is Dan goes up to that room to fight, to kill Adrian, knowing that he can't, knowing that he will never beat him, that there is no way. The man outclasses him on every level, and he's probably just going to his own death, but it doesn't matter, because for his friend Rorschach, he's going to see the right thing done. And then finally, what I really, really love about that ending is half an hour before they've left the owl ship frozen in the Antarctic tundra, and he says, "I'm going to set the engines to defrost," and they just leave it, and you've forgotten all about the ship until he presses that button, and then boom, there's Archie, and it comes through. And really, and the other thing I love about it is that when the ship comes in to crush Adrian, it's probably going to crush Dan too, and he just kind of lucks out, it like smashes Adrian, but he ends up like sort of wedged underneath it, and he's fine. And so I was really sorry that they didn't use that ending, because I thought that it really paid off Dan's character in a hugely significant way, in a way that you don't really get in the final version. But you know, sometimes your darlings are going to die.
So, talk to me about the reaction to the film.
Oh, it was very controversial when it came out, and in fact, Kenneth Turan, who was the main film critic at the LA Times, the title of his review was "The Masks Are Off," and as meant as an insult. Now, a lot of people didn't get it, and a lot of people were offended by it because it was so violent. A lot of people were confused. A lot of people hated it, and or they were confused by it, or they were offended by it. And so I think we made 100 million domestic and 100 million international, but the movie was very expensive. So at the time, it was considered particularly successful. But over time, I actually heard internally from Warner Brothers that they were recalibrating it as a success, that it was a sort of a groundbreaking film for them, and so they were reevaluating it as something they were happy that they'd done. But I also felt, I always knew it was going to be weird, and I always knew it was going to be divisive, and I kind of felt like they shouldn't spend more than $80 million on it, like the first X-Men movie. But they spent a lot of money on it, and I was like, it's not Spider-Man, it's not Batman. Like, this is not easily digestible. This is a hard R, twisted epic. And but basically, I get so much love for it now that it's very gratifying that people have learned to appreciate it for what it is.
And for you, on a personal level, that kid who waited all that time for the final issue to come out, and who's obsessed with this story for so long that they've labored to be able to make it. Was it satisfying for you personally? How do you kind of reflect back on the experience of making Watchmen now?
It was very satisfying for me to take that journey. It was very, very, very satisfying for me to see that the final film was a true adaptation of the book. That was my only goal, was to make sure to protect the material, to make sure that it felt like a true Watchmen adaptation, and it does. To actually watch a film that I've worked on I don't find to be particularly fun. You see all the things that you wish were there, or you wish weren't there, or all the mistakes you made. I always say that it's a bummer to be Steven Spielberg, because he can never sit down and watch Raiders Lost Ark and just appreciate it. All he's doing is like, oh God, that was terrible. That day was so hot. The snake bit me on that day. I can't watch the X-Men movies without being like, oh God, why did I do that? Or remember that horrible day. So the experience of watching it, I'm so grateful that it got made, and I'm so grateful to Zach and Warner's that they made it the way they did. But it's hard to watch anything you've made. That's just a personal feeling of mine.
And do you still see echoes of the themes of Watchmen, the imagery and ideas of Watchmen in contemporary life? So obviously last year we had the acclaimed Watchmen TV show, which I'm guessing you caught a bit of. Did you enjoy it?
I did, yeah. I watched the whole thing. I thought it was beautifully executed, and that episode 6 where she's reliving the memories of her grandfather, I thought was spectacular. The way they wove issues of race into it was so brilliant and gutsy. The actors were amazing. Its legacy sort of carries on there, but at the same time, I think that the darker cynicism and more profound ideas echo through Logan and Batman versus Superman. I think it showed people, you get something like Suicide Squad where it's like, oh, the bad guys are going to be the heroes. Like you see a lot more variety in what they're willing to put into a comic book movie now than you did back then. And I think to a certain extent, Watchmen played a role in that. It demanded that comic book movies be smarter and deal with headier issues than who was going to punch who, and who was going to punch whom.
Yeah. David, your new show, Warrior Nun, has just hit Netflix. It is awesome and completely delivers on that amazing name. So I know that you're executive producer on that show and you have responsibilities beyond writing, but you did write a couple of episodes for its first season. And I wanted to ask, have you changed much as a screenwriter from Watchmen? Do you still have the same kind of writing rituals and approach to writing?
Yeah, I think the rituals are the same. I mean, to me, you get up and you write, for a good 2-3 hours every morning, and that's it. There's no writer's block. There's no, you protect your time and you go out and you do it. And that's the same as I was doing. So I was living in Soho, at the Soho Hotel in London, working on the Greengrass version. And I'd get up and I'd go to the Starbucks around the corner and I'd write for 3 hours and listen to Green Day's American Idiot and just write. I think I've changed in that I'm a lot more confident in my voice now. I think that, Warrior Nun, particularly my episodes, really, I'm a lot freer to be silly, to be funny, to be to push the limits in ways that I think I was a little more careful about back in the early 2000s. And when I was working on Watchmen, like I say, I'm adapting the work of a far superior writer in Alan Moore. So luckily, I didn't have any youthful ego that said, "Oh, you got to make this your own." Just make it Alan's, and that's more than enough. And I wouldn't change that today, but I have changed in my basic approach to screenwriting, my basic confidence in my own voice.
Mm. And where can we next expect to see that voice? What are you working on at the moment? What's coming up?
I can't tell you what it is, but I've closed a deal to executive produce an animated series that I'm also going to star in as a voice actor. So that's kind of cool. I'm writing a movie for one of my all-time favorite legendary directors, and we're hoping that we will get a season 2 order on Warrior Nun and go back and see that through, because I really love that show. I love the cast and the crew, and all the writers it's just such a labor of love, and it really turned out so much better than I expected. So I'm hoping we'll go to Europe and shoot season 2 soon.
Well, David, I can't wait. And this has been absolutely fascinating, kind of the parallel version of this film that might have been. But
Well, I hope it was interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a deep dive for people who are really committed to the world of Watchmen.
That's us.
But I really appreciate you, digging in so deep and really exploring all the different ways it could have been, because it was quite a journey.
You've been listening to Script Apart with me, Al Horner, produced by Kamil Demek, with music by Stefan Bindley Taylor. Get in touch by emailing us at thescriptapartpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.